Usually when we think about capturing time, there's this underlying expectation of a freeze frame.
Right. A totally static moment.
Yeah, exactly. I always picture it like, a butterfly pinned to a velvet board. The clock strikes midnight, the camera shutter snaps, the flash goes off, and boom, the moment is just trapped in amber forever.
It's isolated, completely severed from the actual flow of time.
Right. A closed box. You take that moment, you put it on a shelf, and you say, well, that was the year 1999. But today, that box is getting blown wide open.
It really is. We are looking at a complete paradigm shift today.
We really are. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into some incredibly dense, deeply layered source material titled Millennium Beyond the Millennium, Exploration of the Long-Duration Visual Anthropology of Croatia's Collective Memory. It's all viewed through the lens of one single, staggering, participatory photography project.
A project that takes a concept the entire globe thinks it understands and completely, re-engineers it.
So if you're listening to this right now, I want you to play a quick word association game with us. When you hear the phrase Millennium Photo, your mind probably jumps straight to New Year's Eve 1999.
Oh, for sure. Sydney Harbor fireworks.
Exactly. Or the massive crowds packed into Times Square. You remember the whole Y2K panic, the relief when the power grids didn't just instantly shut down.
People wearing those ridiculous plastic novelty glasses with the zeros as eye holes.
Yes. To the vast majority of the planet, a Millennium Photo is a literal snapshot of a highly specific midnight. But what if the millennium wasn't a date on a calendar at all?
What if it was a living, decades-long project?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the scale of what we're talking about, we have to address the core question driving this entire deep dive.
Which is how a uniquely Croatian artistic phenomenon transformed community photography.
Right. How did it go from a neat visual trick, the kind of thing you'd see in a local paper and forget about, into a multi-decade living archive of national identity?
Because we aren't just talking about taking cool pictures from a helicopter here.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about fundamentally redefining the mechanisms we use to document a society.
So to even begin answering that, we have to dismantle what you, the listener, probably assume the word millennium actually means.
The source material is actually very explicit about this. It draws a hard line between the global understanding of the term and the Croatian reality.
Right, because if I go to a flea market in London or New York or wherever, and I find a box labeled Millennium Photos, I know exactly what I'm getting.
A stack of New Year's Eve Polaroids.
Exactly. It's a single, frozen, highly nostalgic moment. It carries a strict expiration date of January 1st, 2000. You pick one up, you look at the outdated fashion, you chuckle at the frosted tip.
Oh, the frosted tips were everywhere.
And then you toss it back in the box. But Strikoman's work with the Croatian Millennium Fotografije is described in the text as something that actively defies that static nature.
It's presented not as a Polaroid, but as a massive multi-generational scrapbook.
A scrapbook that an entire country is actively gluing pieces into, day after day, year after year.
Because the global concept was purely about passive documentation. The Croatian concept is about active creation.
Right.
Strikoman didn't just want to document the transition into the year 2000. He looked at that global transition, that massive surge of human energy, and decided to use it as a launchpad.
A launchpad for a much larger sociological experiment. But I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because my brain is still anchored to the basic definition of time.
That's totally fair.
I struggle with this a bit. According to the text, a photo taken in the latter half of 2001, or even a photo taken in 2015, or yesterday, absolutely, can be categorized as a Croatian Millennium Photo.
Yes, it can.
Doesn't that just become a gimmick at a certain point? I mean, if the actual millennium happened in the year 2000, how does calling a photograph from 2015 a millennium photo make any logical sense?
It sounds counterintuitive at first.
Right. Why not just call it Croatian aerial photography and drop the branding?
What's fascinating here is how Strikoman completely subverted the temporal nature of the word itself. He did that to avoid it becoming a gimmick.
Wait, how so?
In his hands, the word millennium actually evolved. It stopped being a noun, denoting a specific calendar year. It became a target.
You mean like a numerical goal?
Precisely. He turned a time-based milestone into a quantity-based goal. His underlying philosophy wasn't to take photographs of the millennium.
Oh, I see.
His idea was to create a sprawling, interconnected series of exactly 1,000 Millennium photos.
Ah, so the millennium isn't the date. The millennium is the number 1,000.
Exactly. They're numbered sequentially from the very beginning. Millennium photo number 1, number 2, number 150, all the way up.
That makes so much more sense.
By applying that sequence, the word shifted. It went from representing a fleeting moment in time to representing a monumental continuing process.
That requires a massive psychological shift for the people participating, though.
Oh, absolutely.
It means that when you show up to participate in one of these photos in, say, 2012, you aren't engaging in some weird historical cosplay.
You aren't pretending it's the year 2000.
Right. You're consciously contributing to item number 400-something in a grand collection. You're aware that you are a small part of a much larger continuum.
You're stepping into an ongoing timeline. The source notes this explicitly, actually, when it describes the project as a living cultural project.
Living cultural project. I like that.
It survived the fading of the global millennium celebrations because its engine was never the calendar.
Well, all those other photos were shoved into attics and forgotten.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The engine was the community's desire to participate in that continuum.
But, enthusiasm only goes so far, right? You can have a town full of people eager to be part of a grand continuum, but when they're standing in a freezing field for 4 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, enthusiasm tends to evaporate.
It definitely gets tested.
How do you actually physically manifest that theoretical excitement into a perfect aerial shape without the whole thing collapsing into chaos?
Well, that brings us to the actual mechanics. And this is why the source text leans so heavily on the phrase visual anthropology.
Visual anthropology, okay.
It's a crucial term we need to dissect before we go any further. When we think of traditional anthropology, we usually picture a researcher stepping into an unfamiliar community, right?
Right. Like they observe the local rituals, they sit quietly in a notebook.
Maybe they record some audio, and they try their absolute hardest not to interfere. They just document what is organically happening.
The classic fly-on-the-wall approach. You want to see how the subjects behave when they don't think they're being watched.
But Strikoman's method is the exact inverse of that.
Oh, interesting.
This isn't just a photographer observing a community from a distance. This is a photographer arriving in a town and turning the community into the medium itself.
Wow.
He's acting as a social choreographer.
So the people aren't the subjects of the photograph. They're like the paint on the canvas.
They are the pixels.
Pixels? That is wild.
The text actually outlines the strict criteria for what makes a Croatian Millennium photo. First, they must be massive group photos taken from a high aerial perspective.
Okay. High angle, massive group. Check.
Second, ordinary citizens must be meticulously arranged into specific shapes, words, symbols, or national motifs.
Ordinary citizens, not paid actors.
Right. And third, they are created to mark specific local events, anniversaries, festivals, or moments of civic pride.
Okay, I really need to geek out over the sheer logistical nightmare of this for a moment. Because it's one thing to draw a shape on a piece of paper.
But the logistics are insane.
It's entirely another to draw a shape using 1,000 impatient human beings on an uneven football field. I want you, the listener, to actually visualize this.
It's quite a mental image.
Imagine you're the mayor of a small coastal Croatian town. You invite Strikoman to create a photo for the town's 500th anniversary, and you want the citizens to form the shape of a massive anchor, right? The symbol of your town.
A very common type of request for him.
How does a photographer actually plot out a 100-meter wide anchor on the ground?
It requires a profound understanding of mathematical perspective and anamorphosis.
Anamorphosis. Let's break that down, because that's a heavy word.
Anamorphosis is a distorted projection that only reveals its true shape when viewed from a highly specific vantage point.
Okay. So like those chalk drawings on the sidewalk that look 3D only if you stand in one exact spot.
Exactly like that. If you draw a perfect circle on the field, and then you fly a helicopter up to 500 feet and look down at it from an angle, it won't look like a circle.
It'll look squished.
It will look like a squashed oval.
Right, because the part of the circle furthest from the camera appears smaller than the part closest to the camera.
Exactly. So, to make the final photograph look like a perfect flat anchor, Strikoman cannot draw a normal anchor on the ground.
He has to distort it on purpose.
He has to stretch the design. The parts of the symbol that will be furthest away from the camera lens have to be drawn significantly larger and wider on the grass.
Wow.
The parts closest to the lens have to be smaller. He has to calculate the exact height his lens will be at, the focal length he will use, and the angle of incidence.
I mean, that is a lot of math
And then he has to translate that math into physical space using ropes, stakes, and chalk lines.
That is mind-bending, and that's all before a single person even shows up.
Oh, that's just the prep work.
Once the mathematically distorted chalk outline is on the ground, the real chaos begins. You have to corral thousands of people.
Which is never easy.
Imagine you're standing there in your designated spot, looking around, and all you see is a weirdly curving chalk line, the back of your neighbor's jacket, and a patch of dirt.
Right. From the ground level, the shape makes absolutely zero sense.
The visual is entirely incomprehensible to the people forming it. The trust you have to have in the photographer is immense.
You have to surrender entirely to his vision.
You have no idea what the larger picture looks like. You just have to stand exactly where the guy with the megaphone tells you to stand, trusting that from his vantage point in the sky, your exact placement is forming the left hook of an anchor.
An anchor that can only be understood from above.
Right. It's an incredible leap of faith.
And that required trust is the psychological lever Strikoman pulls to make this work. The source makes a profound assertion about this dynamic, actually.
What does it say?
It states that this project transformed ordinary citizens into active contributors to a national visual identity.
Let's spend some time unpacking that, because the psychological shift that happens in that field, moving from a passive subject in a photograph to an active, load-bearing pixel in a piece of national art, that is a massive leap for the human ego.
It really is. It runs counter to how we normally interact with cameras.
Especially when you think about how we normally behave in front of a lens. Think about a standard group photo, like a massive family reunion or a graduating class picture.
Everyone is vying for the best spot.
Right. You put on some bleachers, you stand there, you put on your best smile, you try to suck in your gut, you try not to blink. Your individual identity remains the absolute focal point of your experience.
And when you see the photo later, what is the very first thing you do?
You scan the crowd until you find your own face.
Yes, you look for yourself.
Always. Dude, I look good in that picture. Were my eyes open? If you look good, it's a good photo. If you're making a weird face, it's a bad photo, even if the other 200 people look perfect.
The ego is central.
Totally. But in Strikoman's Millennium photos, your individual ego has to be entirely dissolved for the art to function.
If you decide to wander off because you see a friend across the field,
or if you refuse to wear the requested red shirt because you think blue looks better on you,
or if you decide to step outside the chalk line because the grass is softer over there,
the symbol breaks. The word becomes illegible.
You are absolutely necessary to the integrity of the image, but you are completely anonymous within it.
You become part of a collective organism. It fundamentally changes how you relate to the image after the fact.
It has to.
When the town hall eventually prints that massive aerial photo and hangs it in the lobby, you don't walk up to it and look for your own face. You probably can't even see your face.
Or just a colored dot.
Exactly. You look at the massive sweeping shape of the anchor and you point to a specific quadrant and say to your kids, hey, I was the top left corner of the hook.
Your sense of collective participation entirely replaces your need for individual recognition.
That is so powerful.
You're an active contributor to a national visual identity.
Yeah.
That phrase from the text is really the heartbeat of this study.
It implies that culture isn't just something you inherit by simply existing in a specific geographic location.
You aren't just passively receiving your heritage. You are standing in a field, physically doing it.
And you're doing it alongside people you might not even know. That is where the visual anthropology label truly earns its keep. By imposing this mathematical grid on a field and forcing people to inhabit it, Strikoman forces cooperation.
The glossy photograph that ends up in the archive is just the final artifact.
The real magic, the actual culture, happened in the 3 hours it took to get 2,000 people into position.
The friction of the gathering is the bonding agent.
The friction, I love that.
The waiting, the shouting through megaphones, the shared complaints about the heat or the cold, the collective laughter when someone trips over a chalk line.
Right.
That is a community actively negotiating its own existence in real time.
It makes the scope of this project even more difficult to wrap my head around. Here's where it gets really interesting.
The scale of it.
Yes. Because if you do this once, if you organize thousands of people into a giant geometric shape in a field that is a spectacular local stunt.
It gets written up in the regional paper. Mm-hmm. Everyone feels a surge of local pride.
And then everyone goes back to their normal lives. If you manage to do it twice, it's a notable logistical achievement. But let's look at the timeline breakdown provided directly by the source text.
The timeline is staggering. The project officially began in the year 2000.
Okay, year zero for the project.
Between 2000 and 2010, the text notes that hundreds of these Millennium photos were successfully created.
Hundreds. In a single decade.
Yes.
I need to do the rough math on that because my brain is rejecting it. Let's say, conservatively, he did 300 photos in that first decade. That means he is organizing these massive town-wide logistical mobilizations about 30 times a year.
Basically every other week.
That is a massive aerial event every 12 days.
It requires a level of stamina and obsessive dedication that is almost frightening. And it didn't slow down after the first decade either.
Really?
The source explicitly tells us that from 2010 stretching to the present day, he has passed the 700 photo mark.
Over 700 massive, highly orchestrated, heavily populated aerial photographs.
At that point, it ceases to be an art project. It's a life's mission.
The sheer resilience required to wake up, drive to a new municipality, convince the local mayor to fund the event,
Convince the local fire department to lend you a ladder truck or charter a helicopter.
wrangle thousands of everyday citizens who have their own busy lives, calculate the anamorphosis, herd the crowd into the lines, and then take the photo. And to do that over and over and over again across more than 2 decades.
And because this project spans from the dawn of the millennium all the way to today, it inherently captures a dimension of history that a single static photograph never could.
Which is what?
It captures profound generational shifts.
Oh, wow.
The text explicitly mentions that this ongoing artistic chronicle is capable of preserving memory, emotion, humor, belonging, and collective participation across generations.
Let's follow a hypothetical citizen through that timeline, because this is where the emotional weight of a 25-year project really hits you. Imagine someone who stood in Millennium Photo number 1 back in the year 2000. Let's say they were a 10-year-old kid. Their parents dragged them out to a field to stand in the shape of a local crest.
Right.
Today, that 10-year-old is in their mid-30s. They could very easily be bringing their own 10-year-old child to stand beside them in Millennium Photo number 750.
You have an unbroken physical chain of memory. When you number these events sequentially, 1, 2, 3, stretching all the way past 700, you aren't just creating an art portfolio.
You're building an index.
You are building a literal spine of Croatian history spanning a quarter of a century.
And because it's an index, you can use it to track subtle sociological changes. If you want to look at how a specific coastal festival has evolved, or how the demographics of a rural farming town have shifted,
or even just observe the subtle changes in how people physically carry themselves when they gather.
You can track it chronologically through these numbers. It's a timeline you can literally lay out on a table and observe.
It creates a fascinating layered effect, particularly when you consider the evolution of the technology surrounding the project.
Oh, true. Think about how much photography itself has changed from the year 2000 to the 2020s.
Massively. In 2000, he was likely shooting on medium format film.
Exactly. He had to shoot on film. He had to physically hang out of the open door of a noisy helicopter.
Or balance on top of a swaying fire engine ladder.
And critically, he couldn't check the back of a digital screen to see if the shape was perfect.
No instant feedback.
None. He had to do the math, direct the crowd, take the shot, and pray that when he developed the film a week later, the anamorphosis worked and the crowd hadn't broken the lines.
The tension of waiting for those negatives to develop must have been excruciating.
But flash forward 20 years. Today, he uses high-resolution digital drones.
He can stand firmly on the ground, holding a remote control with a crystal-clear 4K monitor.
He can hover the drone perfectly in place. He can look at the monitor and say into his megaphone, "Hey, the group in the blue jackets on the left edge, you need to shift 3 feet backward to fix the curve of the letter."
The technology became frictionless. The photographic process became infinitely easier and more precise.
Right.
But this is the crucial point. While the photographic technology evolved from analog film to digital drones, the core mechanism of the art, the human element, remained completely unchanged.
Oh, that's such a good point.
The people still have to physically leave their homes. They still have to travel to the field. They still have to stand shoulder to shoulder with their neighbors. The drone didn't make the human gathering any easier.
It's like an anchor in a rushing river. The water is moving incredibly fast, time is progressing, technology is advancing, the very fabric of society is changing, but Strikoman keeps dropping this heavy anchor of collective memory down to the riverbed.
Saying, stop, we are here, we are together, we are making the shape right now.
This raises an important question regarding the second half of his timeline, though. Creating these massive group photos in the year 2000 is one thing.
The world was relatively analog then.
Yeah, people were used to showing up to physical events to be entertained or to participate in a community, but creating these photos today in an era defined by digital isolation.
It introduces a completely new layer of sociological significance to the archive.
If you're listening to this, you know exactly what we're talking about. You're probably listening to this on a smartphone, a device that contains your entire social life, but can also isolate you from the person sitting right next to you on the bus.
True.
How does a project that absolutely requires thousands of people to physically gather and endure mild discomfort survive and honestly thrive in our modern era?
The source text gives an incredibly sharp answer to this. It survives not by competing with digital culture, but by offering the exact antidote to it.
The exact antidote.
The source makes a very pointed observation here. It argues that these massive group photographs stand out profoundly today precisely because we live in an era dominated by fragmented digital communication and disposable imagery.
Disposable imagery. That is a phrase that hits hard because it is so incredibly accurate.
It really is.
Think about our daily diet of visual media right now.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it, and if we're being honest, everyone listening is guilty of it. We take a picture of our morning coffee, we post it to an ephemeral story, it vanishes into a digital feed within 24 hours, and we completely forget it ever existed.
It's totally fleeting.
We take a selfie, we immediately critique it, we don't like the angle of our chin, we delete it, and we take 6 more until we find one that looks effortless.
The modern process of image creation is almost entirely frictionless.
Mm-hmm.
There's no physical effort required, there's no monetary cost, there is no reliance on anyone else.
Right.
And because there's no friction, there is often no lasting value attached to the image. It is ephemeral. It's consumed and discarded in seconds.
Let's do a direct contrast. Let's put the modern selfie up against the Croatian Millennium Photo.
Okay.
The selfie is hyper-individualistic. It is focused entirely obsessively on the self. It's digital, meaning it exists nowhere in physical space but everywhere on the internet, and it is instantly disposable.
Now look at Strikoman's Millennium Photo.
Right.
It is hyper-collective. It requires the active coordination of thousands of people. It is deeply physical. You have to get in your car, travel to a specific geographic coordinate, stand in the hot sun or the biting wind, and follow complex spatial instructions.
And it is permanent, indexed in a recognized national archive.
It depends entirely, as the text states, on physical presence, cooperation, and shared experience.
The selfie requires isolation. The Millennium Photo demands communion. I am genuinely curious about your take on the psychology of this, though. If you're a citizen of one of these towns, does the sheer friction of the process, the difficulty of the gathering, the time it eats out of your weekend, the minor annoyances of standing in formation, does that friction actually make the final photograph more valuable to you?
Does the difficulty create the meaning?
Yes, does it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human sociology, the answer is a resounding yes. Friction is a prerequisite for value.
Wow.
And this is exactly where the source introduces what is arguably the most powerful conceptual framework in the entire study, the idea of social architecture.
Social architecture.
Yes. The text explicitly argues that Strikoman's work demonstrates how photography can move beyond mere documentation and become a potent form of social architecture.
Okay, break that down for me.
He isn't just arranging bodies on a lawn to pull off a neat visual trick. He is temporarily constructing a highly complex community structure.
Building a community structure, you mean? Like he is forcing people who might otherwise ignore each other in their daily lives to rely entirely on each other for a single afternoon.
Exactly. Let's think about what physical architecture does. A building dictates human behavior.
Right.
A massive cathedral is designed to make you feel small, to force you to look up, to encourage silence and reverence. A bustling public square is designed to encourage loitering, conversation, and commerce.
Architecture forces people to move in certain ways and to interact under specific parameters.
Now, imagine an empty, flat field. The physical architecture of an empty field tells people nothing. There are no rules. People just wander aimlessly.
But then Strikoman arrives.
Strikoman arrives, and he imposes an invisible architecture onto that empty field. By drawing those mathematically distorted lines on the ground and instructing people to fill them, he is creating temporary walls, temporary corridors, temporary rooms made entirely of human beings.
He's engineering a structured environment.
Temporary communities united by participation. I believe that is a direct quote from the text.
It is, and recognizing that is the key to unlocking the true brilliance of the project. The actual masterpiece, the true work of art, isn't the final glossy photograph that gets printed in the newspaper.
No, not at all.
The artwork is the performance of the gathering itself.
Whoa. The performance is the art? The photograph is just the receipt.
Precisely. The photograph is merely the historical evidence that the performance occurred. It's the proof that for one afternoon, in an era of intense digital fragmentation, algorithmic isolation, and endless screen time, 1,000 people made a conscious choice.
They looked away from their screens.
They walked out of their separate, isolated houses, they converged on a central point, and they built something tangible together.
They boldly defied modern isolation. That gives me chills, honestly.
It's powerful stuff.
We spend so much time talking on this show, and in society at large, about how fractured everything feels today. Everyone is siloed in their own algorithmic bubble, consuming media tailored only to them.
You can live in an apartment building for 5 years, pass your neighbor in the hallway every single day, and never learn their first name.
But then this guy with a camera and a megaphone rolls into your municipality, and suddenly the script flips.
You're standing in a field, shoulder to shoulder with the guy who serves you coffee, the teacher who yells at your kids, the mechanic who fixed your brakes, and the mayor you didn't vote for.
And none of those labels matter in that moment because you are all working together to form the left wing of a giant dove.
It forces a restoration of the social fabric, even if that restoration only lasts for a few hours. That is why the source so heavily emphasizes that every participant is elevated to becoming part of a larger visual story.
It is a cultural performance.
If it was just a tedious chore, the project would have quietly died out in 2002.
Exactly. People would have stopped answering the call. But they keep showing up. Town after town, year after year. They want to be part of the social architecture.
Because the social architecture offers them something that a digital interaction fundamentally cannot. It offers physical, undeniable proof of belonging.
When you're standing in that dense human formation, you aren't a username.
You can feel the physical warmth of the person standing next to you. You can hear the collective groan ripple through the crowd when the photographer announces he needs everyone to hold perfectly still for 5 more minutes because a cloud is blocking the sun.
And you share in the massive spontaneous wave of relief and cheering when he finally gives the thumbs up and the final shot is captured.
You cannot digitize that feeling.
You really can't. It is an incredibly primal, fundamentally human experience working together to achieve a goal.
When we step back and analyze the Millennium Photo project in its entirety, what we see is a brilliant, sustained act of resistance.
So what does this all mean? We always try to bring it all together at the end of these deep dives to distill the massive amount of noise down to the pure signal.
We started this journey looking at a calendar. You, the listener, probably came into this deep dive assuming that a Millennium Photo was a dusty, irrelevant artifact from the Y2K era. A locked box at a specific expired date.
Right. A butterfly pinned to a board.
But after unpacking the source material, we see the Croatian phenomenon for what it truly is. It is not an artifact. It is an ongoing, 700 photo-deep, wildly ambitious anthropological archive. It is not about the year 2000. It's about the goal of achieving 1,000 distinct moments of unity.
And my core belief as an analyst is always that knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and actively applied to our own lives. What Strike a Man's life's work proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that collective memory isn't something that just naturally happens to us.
National or community identity isn't just an atmospheric condition you inherit simply by being born in a certain place.
It isn't passive. You don't just absorb it through osmosis.
No. It is something we have to actively, constantly build. It requires genuine effort.
It requires a willingness to step out of our comfortable, frictionless, fragmented digital lives.
It requires us to embrace the friction, the weather, the real world, and to physically stand together.
The social architecture of the community doesn't build itself. It has to be constructed by the people, again and again, generation after generation.
That is beautifully said. It's a perpetual, active process. If we want the big picture to exist, we have to volunteer to be the pixels.
Which brings us all the way back to that very first image we talked about at the top of the show.
We have to stop viewing time as a static butterfly pinned to a board or as a closed box. We need to view it as an open, empty field waiting to be filled.
The calendar didn't stop in 2000.
The millennium is still happening every single time we choose to gather and create a shape together.
It is a continuing process of documenting society through collective creativity. That is the true, hard-earned definition of the millennium in this context.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the archives of podcaster.capital, I want to leave you, listening right now, with a direct, lingering question.
Something to mull over as you commute, as you go back to your day.
And perhaps especially the next time you find yourself endlessly scrolling through your own digital feeds. Imagine if Šime Strikoman arrived in your town today.
Imagine he parked his ladder truck in your local park, unrolled his blueprints, and announced he was going to capture the true identity of your community from the sky.
If given the choice, what exact shape or symbol would your community even form? What singular image truly represents who you are collectively?
And more importantly,
in this era of extreme digital fragmentation, who in your life would actually show up, put down their phones, brave the cold, and stand in that field beside you?